The Suncrest Motel crouched on a lonelier mile of desert than any map admitted, a battered row of doors facing a parking lot the color of old ash. Its neon sign crackled a sickly promise: clean rooms, then fizzed to silence, as if the letters were embarrassed by their own optimism. Truckers passed without slowing. The wind kept its own appointments. And yet on a warm Thursday in June, 12 separate lives, threading toward distant cities, chose this place as a brief shelter from the long American night. Richard Combs worked the desk. He kept the television low, the coffee burnt, the ledger squared perfectly with the counter's edge. At 6:12 p.m., a dusty Corolla pulled in and a young couple stepped out, Daniel and Mia Torres, sun-pink and laughing from the kind of argument that ends with holding hands. "Is the pool open?" Mia asked. Richard shook his head. The pool had been empty for years, its paint scabbed and echoing. Room 2 took them, a key on a ring heavy as a worry. A salesman arrived next, Carl Whitman, carrying 2 wheeled cases that clicked like bones. He wanted a corner room and paid in cash, flattening the bills with careful fingers. "Early start," he said, tapping the cases. Richard nodded, pretending not to notice the sweat beading under the salesman's hairline as if the sun had followed him indoors. At dusk the Millers arrived, road-weary and sugared from convenience store dinners, Harold at the wheel, Diane with a roadmap unfolded like a hopeless prayer, Emily and Jacob threatening to explode if they weren't allowed to cannonball somewhere soon. Room 8 swallowed their relief along with armfuls of snacks. "We'll swim at the next place," Diane promised. The kids pressed their faces to the window, watching the emptiness cool into blue. A pair of truckers, Frank with the radio laugh, Leon with a stitched-on frown, took room 10 and filled it with the perfume of diesel and menthol. A schoolteacher named Marlene checked into 9, her knuckles pale on the pen as she wrote her name. "Locks are solid?" she asked twice. Richard handed her the extra chain, and she gave a grateful smile that looked like an apology for being afraid. The last guest came at 10:41. He wore a gray suit that looked pressed by absence and signed simply Hughes. No first name, no small talk. The ledger accepted his letters and the key accepted his hand. On his way to room 12 he paused beneath the neon, face rinsed in pink lightning, then went on as if the pause were a door he alone had opened. The hour drifted past the half-dead shrubs and over the skeletal pool. Rooms sighed into sleep, televisions murmuring, shower pipes complaining. At 11:53 p.m., the cameras bolted to the office ceiling and the overhang outside caught one last image, Frank and Leon stepping out for a cigarette, 2 dull stars at the ends of their fingers. The frame buckled into static, a snowstorm with its sound turned off. It never moved again. Richard dozed. He dreamed the bell at the desk rang and rang without anyone pushing it, the kind of dream that leaves the body sitting up to make sure the world is still attached. Around 2 he shuffled the nightly accounting and told himself the quiet was a compliment. By 7 he made coffee and opened the drawer for the receipt paper. The air felt polished, as if the motel had been cleaned from the inside out. He knocked on room 2. No answer. He tried 4. Silence lapped against the door like a lake. With the master key he opened 2 and stepped into order, bedspread smooth, curtains exactly half closed, air conditioner ticking like a slow thought. The Torres' cooler was gone. Their bag was gone. Their toothpaste left no ring in the sink. He checked the next room, then the next. 8 was empty of Millers, the beds were made more neatly than children allow. 10 was emptied of truckers. 9 held nothing but the simple furniture of a motel's promises. 12 was immaculate, the pillow unwrinkled, the closet yawning its small, wooden breath. All 12 rooms were tidy as a stage before the actors arrive. Police found the scene offensive in its tidiness. No forced locks, no broken windows, no spooked gravel, not even a breakfast crumb. The parking lot held only Richard's Pontiac and an oil stain the shape of Wyoming. Helicopters stitched circles over the flats for 2 days and found heat, mirage, and the occasional unbothered coyote. The cameras surrendered nothing after 11:53, their tapes became endless weather. The ledger, once a solemn row of names, began to pale at the edges. By the 3rd day, the signatures thin like breath on glass. By the 7th, the lines were empty as if the ink had been persuaded to move on. The families arrived, bewildered and loud with grief. Mia's sister planted herself in the office like a flag and called the Torreses over and over, insisting the phone would eventually remember how to be a bridge. Harold Miller walked the lot after sunset, calling his children's names into a sky that ignored him with professionalism. Carl's employer faxed a polite storm about liability and product loss. Marlene's sister, arriving in a sweater too warm for June, pressed a photo into Richard's palm, two women on a pier, hair blown sideways, a promise in their eyes that had not been written to expire. The FBI added procedure to the desert. Agents in crisp shirts built a timeline precise as dentistry. None of the guests' bank cards woke after the 11th. Highway cameras miles away saw only strangers. The trucker's dispatch recorded a click at 11:47 and then nothing. A clerk at a mini-mart remembered a pale man in a gray suit buying a single bottle of water and leaving it unopened on the counter. The bottle could not be found. The clerk could not swear what day it had been. Suncrest had a history, of course. Everything that stands still long enough in the desert collects it. Old-timers remembered school teams swimming in that pool before the county decided the highway would curve elsewhere. A deputy swore that in '87 he'd picked up a woman staggering barefoot near the property, whispering that her room had exhaled and her family had sifted away like flour. Her name, Alice Crawford, attached itself to a thin report and then to the rumor like a paper sail to a dark toy boat. People made theories with the materials at hand. The practical said, a con in uniform knocked on doors and march-ordered a dozen people into vans. But there were no tire cuts in the dust, and even cons leave pennies of sound behind. The romantic said, a cult baited travelers and harvested them for whatever harvesters desire. The skeptic laughed and pointed at books with aliens on their covers. The mystic lifted a shoulder. There are rooms you enter once. The desert has corridors older than highways and some of them don't bother with doors. Through it all, Richard kept coming back to the hour that wasn't there. He replayed the static like prayer. He sat in room 12 at different times of day and tried to detect what Hughes had put down and picked up. The room declined to have a personality. He opened drawers he'd opened a dozen times and once found a single black thread like the tail of a comet. He placed it on the desk blotter, and when he looked again it was gone. After that he slept with the office light on, though he would not have admitted the reason even to the coffee pot. Months rolled their sleeves up and became years. Suncrest closed, then reopened briefly as a filming location, then closed for good. The sign stopped pretending. Sand stitched its slow hem against the doors. Teenagers broke windows and took photographs of their fear. Urban explorers uploaded videos. Our breath in the beam of a flashlight, the pool like a wound, a sudden sound that is probably a raccoon but feels like a sentence. Someone spray-painted "We never left" across the office wall, someone else crossed out "never" and wrote "ever." Pilgrims of the strange walked the balcony and said they felt looked through rather than at. Detectives retired. New detectives learned the case as a cautionary fairy tale about evidence that refuses to be. Journalists built podcasts out of it, braiding interviews with synth notes and expensive silence. A woman in Idaho claimed to have been the last person to speak with Marlene on a payphone. A man in Texas confessed to a dozen crimes that did not include these. Richard, gray as the suit he remembered, granted one final interview. I gave them keys, he said. 12 keys. I counted them at dawn and they were still 12. Tell me how a place can be full and empty in the same breath. The interviewer waited for more. More did not arrive. A county work crew came to chain the doors in 2011. The foreman, bored and sunburnt, signed the inventory: 12 mattresses, 9 televisions, a lobby plant bleached to paper. He hesitated at the ledger, the famous blank ledger, and wrote his name in the first line to prove ink could still exist. The next morning the page held only the trench of a pen with nothing in it. The foreman did not mention this to anyone, because there are indignities a man refuses to allow paper to commit against him. What remains are the edges. The Torres parents still keep a room ready for holidays that fall quieter than they should. Diane Miller mails themselves the children's report cards she imagines, sealing the envelopes with care and putting them in a shoebox labeled for later. Carl Whitman's company keeps a line on a spreadsheet for inventory lost to acts of God, which is accounting for haunting. On cool nights, truckers say, if you idle by the old exit you can hear two men laughing about nothing at all, and then you notice you've been holding your breath. Sometimes a storm hoists itself over the flats and the sign's tubing stutters to a phantom pink. On such nights the rooms, if you stand outside and listen with the unwise attention of a child, seem to be waiting for a cue. The air in the doorway feels a degree colder, like the room has its own weather. You will want to say a name. Any name. 12 are available. The wise thing is to keep walking. As for Hughes, the pale hinge at the end of the row, no one found him forward or back. The DMV shrugged. Banks shrugged better. The desk drawer where Richard once kept the key to 12 developed a habit of being opened by a finger width every morning. He would close it, and by lunch it would confess to being open again. Old wood, the locksmith said, which everyone agreed was a satisfying shape of certainty. Stories like this do not conclude, they reach a polite distance and turn to look at you. In the emptiness where an ending should be, people plant their favorites. A killer in a badge. A government laugh. A kink in the world's fabric that snagged a dozen threads and would not unknot. The desert with its private mouth. The rooms with their private ears. Between exit 41 and exit 62 the highway still heats to a shimmer that looks like water. Thirst will tell you things are closer than they are. So will grief. So will a sign that wakes for a minute and spells clean before it forgets how letters work. If you must bring water for the long mile and skepticism for the shorter one. Do not write your name in any book you are not prepared to lose. Do not accept keys from a man who has perfected the art of not hoping. Stand in the doorway and feel the air lean, just slightly, toward you. Hear the hush that is not quite silence. Tell yourself it is only the desert breathing. Tell yourself there are 12 rooms and the sum is 0. Tell yourself there was never a couple, a salesman, a family, 2 truckers, a teacher, a gray suit at the end. Tell yourself anything you like. The motel does not argue. It waits, which is the desert's favorite verb. And by morning, if you listen carefully, you will hear the housekeeping carts of memory roll past the doors, and every room, every last, immaculate room, will be empty again. Years later a graduate student in folklore drove out with a handheld recorder and the kind of patience graduate students wear like sunscreen. She found Richard living in a tidy apartment whose windows refused to face west. He brewed instant coffee and unfolded his memory slowly, like a map that wants to stay creased. She asked about the faded signatures. He nodded. Paper forgets, he said. If it can forget names, it can forget people. She did not put that line in her thesis because it sounded like a stolen poem. The student spent a night at Suncrest with permission from a deputy who thought a little bravery would itch the town back to life. Midnight met her at the threshold. In room 8 she set the recorder on the dresser and listed the names of the missing out loud, a roll call to an empty class. The file later contained only her breath and the soft rattle of the vent. At 3:07 a.m., the levels rose as if the room inhaled. Nothing else. When she left at dawn she felt unthanked. In 2016 a road crew resurfacing the highway uncovered a broad, pale stain in the shoulder half a mile from the motel, shaped vaguely like a lily pad. It wasn't oil. It wasn't salt. The lab report said, residue unknown, non-reactive, odorless. The crew chief photographed it and sent the picture to his brother, who sent it to a forum that sent it everywhere. For a week the stain was the internet's favorite ghost. The Sun bleached it out before anyone agreed what it meant. There were smaller reports, the way a loose key on a forgotten ring warmed as if held, the way a locked door was found ajar in the morning though dust still bridged the jam. A teenager claimed the vending machine in the lobby coughed up a can of grape soda dated with a lot code discontinued in 2003. A deputy put the can on his shelf for luck and found it empty the next day, as if someone had drunk the year from it. Finally the county fenced the property. The fence keeps nothing in and nothing out, it only lets people feel that something has been done. Coyotes pad along its length and do not bother to look sideways. The fence gate whines the same note each time it swings, like a question practicing itself. If you ask the map, the motel sits between coordinates, which is another way of saying it sits inside an idea. People still pull over to take pictures through the diamonds of the chain link. Sometimes they call a name Daniel, Mia, Emily, and laugh to show they do not expect an answer. Sometimes the laughter turns uncertain at the edges, as if the air had considered answering and then changed its mind. The highway goes on performing its ribbon act. The desert waves once and forgets you again. There is a story that one winter a snow-thin, astonished, more rumor than storm, floated over the flats and settled on the motel like a thought that had finally decided to visit. By morning, the motel wore its only expression, tidy, soundless, waiting, as if emptiness itself had checked in. Now,